This video features tips for every single card in Clash Royale. And even if you don't use every card, it is very important to learn all these tips so your opponent can't use them against you. Starting things out with the Bowler, which can actually be used on defense against a Goblin Barrel to completely shut it down. It turns out the rock is just big enough to hit all 3 goblins in a straight line, denying any damage to your tower. The Bandit is actually immune to all damage during her dash, and you can use this to your advantage in a couple of critical interactions, like soaking up a blast from a Sparky or absorbing a charge from a Prince, because both of those attacks technically land while she's still in mid-dash. Knowing this can be key for pulling off some clutch defenses with a 3 elixir cost card. And this will also work with the Golden Knight's ability. Speaking of the Golden Knight, he can be paired up with a sneaky tornado spell to almost always guarantee a dash connection on their tower, regardless of where they drop the defensive units. Because of this, you have to be very careful if your opponent has both a Golden Knight and a tornado in their deck. While the Archer Queen is invisible, it can be very effective to sneak another unit in front and tank, allowing her to survive longer, providing substantially more DPS. The Skeleton King surprisingly has a ton of mass or weight, which is a hidden stat in Clash Royale that impacts a unit's ability to push through other units. And because it's so heavy, you can use the Skeleton King to push your win conditions away from buildings and onto your enemy's crown tower. Just like this Royal Giant right here. A well-timed Mighty Miner ability can fully counter a Goblin Barrel. The Monk's ability will also convert spawning units into your own, which can be very effective against things like a Barbarian Barrel, because not only does it deny damage to your push, but it also converts the Barbarian to your army, and very often it will instantly lock onto your enemy's crown tower. The Earthquake actually makes for a semi-decent counter for the Graveyard, because the damage is spread across 3 different waves, and each of those waves is able to completely kill a skeleton, which gives you time between the waves to wait for a few more skeletons from the Graveyard to spawn, providing a bit of area denial. The Log can actually be used to activate your own King Tower against a Monk if you're able to pull it into the middle of the arena and bait them into activating their ability. This is a very niche interaction, but honestly is incredibly satisfying to pull off, and the look on your opponent's face when you activate your own King Tower with your own Log is priceless. The Tornado spell can not only pull a hover to your King Tower, but many other units like Skeleton Barrel, Balloon, Goblin Barrel, or even a Graveyard if it is under-leveled, because an under-leveled Tornado spell does not end up killing the skeletons in one tick. And because of this, these skeletons survive just long enough to reach your King Tower and get one shot off, therefore activating it. Many players will actually keep their Tornado spell 1 level lower than max for this specific reason. A well-timed Zap spell can force your enemy's tower to retarget when they least expect it, allowing even a 1 HP unit enough time to deal devastating damage or force out a greater response. This is one of my favorite tricks in all of Clash Royale to pull off, and it is incredibly satisfying to do. The Giant Snowball can be used to knock back a miner towards your King Tower if it is used in an inside location. Most skilled players will not use the miner in this location, but it is important to remember if the opportunity ever presents itself. The Barbarian Barrel is one of the best and most versatile spells in the entire game. It can be used to pull enemy air units to the opposite lane and away from a push, or to utilize the spawning Barbarian to assassinate a support behind a tank, or even over a river to take out critical enemy defenses, clearing the way for your offensive push. The arrows can still damage units far enough away from a Monk, even if his ability is activated. This is because the Monk only reflects the individual arrows that land within his radius. So keep this in mind if you are using a Monk and relying on the ability to protect your swarm. Because of the long deploy timer and the lack of Amazon Prime, a royal delivery needs to be played very early to ever have a chance of fully countering a Goblin Barrel. You basically have to drop it as soon as you see the Goblin Barrel leaving the King Tower, but it could also be used to fully stop a Skeleton Barrel, even denying the death damage from hitting your tower, and the spawning recruit will distract and destroy the spawning skeletons. Because of the slowing movement speed effect of the poison, it can actually be used to fully deny an unsupported Balloon, which can come in more than clutch if you don't have any air defense cards in your hand, and is very important to remember if you find yourself in a critical situation. The Rocket is the slowest projectile spell, and where you place it on your enemy's tower can end up making a huge huge difference. If you are tight on time, you always want to use it on the inside corner of a tower because that is the shortest path, and in critical moments, even fractions of a second can make a huge difference when it comes down to the wire. The lightning spell will always target the 3 highest HP units within its radius, and it does this in order, meaning it won't choose the second target until after the first lightning spell goes down, which can very often give you just enough time to sneak in a higher HP unit to protect a critical target. For example, if your tower is very low HP, consider dropping in a swarm at the last second to soak up your enemy's lightning spell. Now you have to keep this in mind if your opponent's tower is very low HP and you intend to use the lightning spell to finish it off. Most players will try to predict this and drop something at the very last second to block your lightning spell. So to prevent this, number 1, be a little unpredictable with your timing. Maybe wait an extra half second or more if you can afford it, just to throw them off. Or number 2, use it in an unpredictable location where they're less likely to drop a card within the radius. I would suggest placing it where only the corner is touching a tower and off to the side where your opponent isn't expecting it. The freeze spell can be very effective at completely shutting down an Electro Giant. This is because the Electro Giant is unable to counterattack while stunned or frozen, and this can very often allow your swarm units enough time to survive without taking damage to DPS and destroy the Electro Giant down, denying substantial damage from reaching your tower. The Rage spell has great synergy with the Ram Rider, not only increasing the movement speed, but because of the new damage effect as well, it'll synergize with the Ram Rider and allow her to one-shot finish off things like goblins or bombers. Similarly, you can also use a Lumberjack to go in front of your Ram Rider to utilize the death effect for the same results. The clone spell can be used to push your units towards an enemy tower when they least expect it. Pair this up with a powerful card like the Giant Skeleton, and even if they have defenses distracting in front of it, because of the push effect, you can very often sneak a giant bomb just within range of your tower, dealing devastating damage. The +1 level of the mirror can come in clutch for a Goblin Barrel because a 1 level higher goblin versus a tower ends up taking 3 tower shots per goblins instead of the traditional 2, which overall makes a huge difference in the total amount of damage that Goblin Barrel will deal. Just be sure to bait your opponent's counter cards first. The Hog Rider can be used on defense to distract and pull away enemy units away from your tower, and can very often do this without taking damage himself if you use it to jump over the river in the proper location. When using a Royal Giant deck to break through enemy defenses, it is often better to place your first Royal Giant behind your King Tower and then fast cycle to a second Royal Giant before the first one goes down. That way, after the first one baits out all of your enemy defenses, you already have another one ready to go, hopefully to catch your opponent off guard. The Elixir Golem is one of the most difficult win conditions to successfully use.
I'm sorry, what?
It is best to wait for the double extra period before using the Elixir Golem, and that way you can actually afford the required support to get your Elixir Golem to that tower. Things like a Battle Healer, Electro Dragon, and a support spell like NATO, Rage, or Arrows are all required. So placement and critical timing are key to have a chance of success with the Elixir Golem. The Ram Rider can be used on defense to fully deny an unsupported balloon while simultaneously providing counter push value. In fact, it's a great shutdown card overall against a variety of other win conditions like E-Giants, Giants, or Hog Riders. This is a great way to get double value for your Elixir. If you're already going to be spending 5 Elixir for a Ram Rider, you might as well use it on defense to also stop your enemy's tank in the process, and then it still pushes to the tower. The Sparky can be paired up with a perfectly timed Zap spell to momentarily stun things like an Electro Wizard or a Bandit, giving your Sparky just enough time to get that blast off before the Electro Wizard attacks or before the Bandit dashes. This can often instantly catch your opponent off guard, turning the tides of battle and winning in one critical interaction. Just be sure to practice it with a friend or in party mode before trying it in real battles. Consistently switching up your Goblin Barrel placements can be key for catching your opponent off guard and maximizing damage potential. A few placements to consider are to the side of of a building if your opponent has a Barbarian Barrel, in front or behind if they tend to use a ground card to stop it in a particular location, or even 1 or 2 tiles behind a tower to try and trick your opponent into missing their spell. The Magic Archer is one of the funnest cards in all of Clash Royale, with the ability to snipe your opponent's tower from a variety of different locations. Learn these locations and then study your opponent's habits in battle, and then bait them into using a card in front of their tower, and then instantly drop down a Magic Archer to snipe away, hit that tower, and watch as that juicy tower damage adds up. With this in mind, if your opponent has a Magic Archer, you have to know they will be trying this trick on you, so don't use any of your cards in front of your tower in the location where a Magic Archer could clip it as well. The Giant can be used in the middle to pull enemy support units to the opposite side and away from their push. And you can pair this trick up with flying units to safely destroy ground cards, or even better, if you're using a Sparky deck, play the Sparky behind your King Tower, and when your opponent tries to rush the opposite lane, drop your Giant in the middle, pull all of their support to the same lane as the Sparky, and watch as your Sparky completely decimates all of the elixir they just spent. The Battle Ram can also be used in the middle to pull units to the opposite lane, but it also has many other uses on defense, like dropping it behind a tank to distract enemy support units, and the spawning Barbarians will help DPS them down. This can be critical against high damage units like the Sparky, with the Ram soaking up the initial blast and the spawning Barbarians DPSing the Sparky down. The 3 Musketeers are best played split behind your King Tower to prevent your opponent from getting too much spell value. Both the Royal Ghost and the Battle Healer have the unique ability to float over the river, and you can use this to your advantage to send them over the river, taking out enemy range cards or critical defenses. The Skeleton Barrel can be used on defense to distract enemy support units, with the spawning skeletons very often being able to overwhelm and destroy them. And you can even combine the death damage of the Skeleton Barrel with another small splash card like a Spirit to destroy heavier swarm. The Ice Wizard can be used to completely destroy all of the spawning skeletons from a Skeleton Barrel, and you can even pair it up with another small splash damage card like a Spirit to completely destroy a minion horde. If playing an X-Bow and your opponent tries to distract with a unit on the opposite lane, you can use the knockback of the log to push that target outside of the range of your X-Bow, allowing the X-Bow to lock onto their tower. When playing a Golem, if you drop it in the bottom corner of the arena, it helps increase your chances of bypassing enemy defenses if they place him too far off to the side. The Miner can be used to trick your opponent by pulling key defenders to the opposite lane. For example, if you drop a Giant and your opponent uses a P.E.K.K.A., sneak in a Miner, pull the P.E.K.K.A. to the opposite side, and your Giant has a clear path to your enemy's tower. If you're using an Electro Giant and you're facing off against a Fisherman, you have to have the Tornado spell hovering and ready to go to immediately drop as soon as the Fisherman enters the arena. And this is because the Fisherman can't actually be pulled by the Tornado once the hook animation has begun. So if you want to prevent your Electro Giant from being pulled, you have to immediately drop the Tornado. The Lava Hound can be pushed with a balloon to slightly increase its movement speed. The Wall Breakers can be used on defense to kite and pull away enemy units, and very often because of their fast movement speed, they will also connect to an enemy tower if they don't immediately respond. When using a Graveyard, drop it in this location if your opponent is defending with spells, and this location if they're defending with units. And obviously be careful not to use it too close to a King Tower, otherwise these spawning skeletons will attack and activate your opponent's King. The Goblin Giant can be used on defense to counter things like a Graveyard or a Balloon, or it can be used in the middle to pull enemy units to the opposite lane, while the Spear Goblins safely destroy them from the Goblin Giant's back. The Bats can be used as a cheap distraction over the river to prevent an enemy Inferno Tower from locking onto your higher health units. The Minions and the Minion Horde can both be used to push a balloon off to the side, allowing it to bypass enemy buildings placed in the middle of the arena. The Baby Dragon and the Skeleton Dragons can both be used to push a balloon to a tower faster. The Inferno Dragon has just enough range to attack an Electro Giant from outside of his counterattack radius, and if placed properly, it can completely deny an Electro Giant. But very often your opponent will have a Tornado spell ready to go, so either bait their Tornado earlier on or have another defender ready to go if they do drop the Tornado. Against an Electro Dragon, you can easily activate your own King Tower by dropping a card between the King and the Tower just as the Electro Dragon initiates its attack. This can also work against an enemy Electro Spirit. The Mega Minion can be used to body block and redirect a balloon towards the middle of the arena, which is very effective if it seems like it might bypass one of your buildings. The Flying Machine with its long range can be used to snipe an enemy Elixir Collector placed between both of the towers. The Furnace provides a guaranteed 2 Fire Spirit spawn, 1 from the initial drop and 1 from the destruction, and you can use this in emergency situations to destroy a swarm. When you're using an Inferno Tower, you can often catch your opponent unprepared by aggressively placing your Inferno at the river to immediately lock on to their tank before they have a moment to distract it. Both the Tesla and the cannon can be placed outside of the optimal earthquake range, preventing an enemy earthquake from damaging both your tower and your defensive building while still pulling your enemy units. The mortar can be used in the middle at the river to simultaneously pull and distract an enemy tank while locking onto their tower if they don't have any other distractions available. The Goblin Hut provides an excellent source of chip damage if played on the opposite lane that your opponent is focusing on, and can very often force them to switch lanes with their defensive units or at least bait out a spell. The Elixir Collector is actually surprisingly good on defense against an unsupported Electro Giant, and this is because the Collector obviously does not attack and therefore incurs no counterattack damage, and as a result, it's actually a positive trade at destroying and shutting down an Electro Giant. A well-placed Tombstone can fully counter a mortar if properly timed, such that the spawning skeletons always spawn out before the Immortal locks onto its next target, and this will perpetually distract it for the entire duration of the mortar. You should also use your Tombstone behind a tower if you're facing off against a graveyard deck. This is because the Tombstone and the spawning skeletons will distract almost all of the graveyard. The Barbarian Hut can be fully countered for 1 4 Elixir Fireball. So keep this in mind if you're using a Barbarian Hut and your opponent has a Fireball, maybe bait their Fireball first or just don't use the Barbarian Hut. A Bomb Tower's death damage is enough to instantly destroy Lava Pups, which can come in clutch in emergency situations. Against a Hog Rider, it is best to use a Goblin Cage in the middle of the lane, and that's because it allows the spawning Brawler to body block the Hog Rider and instantly start attacking it, allowing it to fully counter a Hog Rider instead of the traditional middle placement. The Executioner's long range after hitting its initial target very often allows it to clip a tower if attacking a unit in front of it, and you can use this to your advantage by pairing it up with a Tornado to pull everything in line of the tower, allowing the Executioner to not only destroy their defenders, but also give you free tower damage in the process. The Fire Spirit can be used to fully counter a Fisherman, providing a nice little +2 Elixir trade. The Firecracker is almost always a guaranteed free King activation. Just drop almost any card at this location once she crosses the river, and then she'll attack it, miss your Crown Tower, and hit your King Tower with the resulting splash damage. The Skeleton Army makes a fantastic Goblin Barrel counter, allowing you to save your spells for the rest of their bait cards. However, if you do this too often, your opponent will catch on and then start placing the Goblin Barrel in front of the tower and pairing it up with an immediate lock spell. So just be prepared to switch it up if your opponent is catching on. When using a Mega Knight on defense against things like Barbarians or Elite Barbarians, it is often better to place the Mega Knight slightly off to the side, still making use of that spawn damage, but then afterwards, it'll be able to splash all of the cards at once. Whereas if you use it in the middle, the cards will end up surrounding your Mega Knight and he will only be able to splash a couple of cards at a time. And with that note, if you're using Elite Barbarians to defend against a Mega Knight, make sure you drop them directly on top of the Mega Knight so they surround from both sides, because the Mega Knight will only be able to attack one of your Elite Barbarians at a time. This trick can also be done with many other Swarm cards like Guards, Barbarians, or Goblin Gang. Just make sure you drop them before the Mega Knight begins his jump animation, otherwise he will finish his jump and completely destroy your entire swarm. The Electro Wizard can be placed in the middle of the arena, and his 2-pronged attack will allow him to stop and deny split wall breakers on both sides. The Prince and the Dirt Prince can jump over the river to assassinate key enemy defenses, or pair them up to combine a high damage single target DPS with a splash damage card to create a very difficult push to stop. When using a P.E.K.K.A. or Mini P.E.K.K.A. to defend things like a giant Hog Rider or Ram Rider, be sure to place them in the middle of the lane to fully counter. If you use them too high or too low, they will very often sneak by, getting at least one shot to your tower. A Heal Spirit or Ice Spirit can be used in this location to fully destroy spawning skeletons from a skeleton barrel if properly timed. The Giant Skeleton is another card that has a ton of mass or weight, so similar to the Skeleton King, it can also be used to push your units towards a tower and away from enemy defenses. The Goblin Gang and guards can both be used to fully stop a Goblin barrel. Use the long range and high damage of the Musketeer to your advantage to snipe key enemy defenses from over the river, clearing the way for your offensive push. The Dark Goblin's range is so long it's able to attack units at the bridge on the opposite lane. This can be key if you want your Dark Goblin to counter push and chip away at a tower that's on a different lane than the one you want to defend. The Knight for only 3 elixir makes a great counter to the Mega Knight, pulling it into the middle of your arena, engaging both towers for extra DPS to fully counter it. This will also secure a massive positive elixir trade, which you can use to further build momentum. If your opponent lacks an effective counter or has a very slow cycle, you can stack up your princesses to gain momentum and build that pressure. Just be sure to spread them far enough apart to prevent your opponent from getting too much value. The Spirit Goblins can make for a very efficient response for a Goblin barrel if you have nothing else in your hand. The Ice Spirit is the perfect card to synergize with a Goblin barrel, going in and tanking, and then freezing the tower, giving goblins more time to deal more damage. And all of this for only 1 extra elixir. The Night Witch will always spawn 1 bat on the opposite lane if played behind your king tower, which can actually help defend the opposite lane, or you can sneak in a fast unit to tank while that 1 bat quickly ramps up in damage. The Hunter is best paired up with a Fisherman to pull units in close to utilize the high damage output at close range. You can also pair this up with 1 elixir skeletons for a quick distraction if you're pulling a high damage unit like a P.E.K.K.A. When using Royal Hogs, if your opponent has a lot of splash damage, it is often best to split them up on both sides of the arena with 2 Hogs going to both towers. When using the Goblin Drill, make sure you switch up the location of your drill to not become too predictable, but also keep in mind if you use it directly in front of the towers, the goblins will spawn out between the drill and the tower, increasing your chances of it locking on. When using Rascals, you can often split them up and have 1 Rascal go to the opposite lane, providing a bit of extra defensive value. These Zappies are an excellent card to counter the Electro Giant, and that's because the E-Giant isn't able to counterattack while stunned, and if you place these Zappies such that they stagger their attacks, he will be perpetually stunned, giving you free reign to destroy him. When using a Mother Witch to defend against a graveyard, be sure to place her behind your king tower. This will make her substantially harder for your opponent to hit with a spell. The Fisherman can be used to activate your king tower against most tanks like Giant, Hog Rider, Golems, or Electro Giants, but it can also come in clutch on offense by pulling high damage units away from your win condition. And like I mentioned before, pair this up with Skeletons and a Hunter for distraction and destruction. If your opponent lacks appropriate splash damage counters, the Royal Recruits can be played to completely deny both sides of the arena and ultimately gaining massive momentum. The Ice Golem offers a ton of utility for only 2 elixir. You can pull units to the opposite lane, you can push a miner off of your tower and force it to change targets. You can use the death damage to destroy skeletons or pair it up with a Zap spell to completely destroy a minion horde. The Cannon card can be pushed to lock on your enemy's tower faster, and because of the high damage and high health, this can end up dealing a ton of damage in mere moments. Even though the Witch has a relatively low HP for a 5 elixir cost card, she's actually fantastic on defense because of the quick spawn of her first wave of skeletons. She can be used to deny high damage attackers like a charging prince or a dashing bandit. This is because these skeletons spawn out almost instantly, soaking up that high damage initial attack. The archers can be split up in the middle, providing additional distraction and more time for your towers to deal damage. The 1 elixir skeletons and the 2 elixir goblins make great distraction cards because of their low elixir cost and their ability to deal decent DPS if unanswered, or surround and swarm even splash damage attackers. The Phoenix can be used in emergency situations with the splash death damage to destroy an incoming swarm. The cheapest spell to destroy a bomber is the arrows, which makes the bomber a great card to bait the arrows out and then punish with a more powerful card like the minion horde. When defending using a Valkyrie, try and wait for all of your opponent's units to cross the river, and that way her splash attack is able to hit all of the targets. This seems simple, but I can't tell you how many players don't do this and they rush to drop the Valkyrie at the bridge. Meanwhile, their opponent's ranged attackers are safely out of range. The Wizard has the best terror in Clash Royale. Nice. Now, that was a ton of tips. I hope you found something helpful. If you did, consider leaving a like on the video or subscribing if you want to see more.